So Chris is our moderator tonight, and he brought with us a great panel of experts of user experience. Everyone is excited to learn. I'm totally trying not to read anything about it, but Chris has his own company. You've already read about the speakers, Freshspectrum LLC. Got a great panel today. We're looking forward to learning, and it's very interactive, so hopefully you'll have a chance to ask your questions. I'll turn it over to you. Introduce your panelists. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you everyone for coming. Let's see. Tanya, Nathan, where are you? There you are. Lexi, you guys will come up. I'll introduce myself. Do you guys want this, or do you want yes?
Yeah. Okay.
So we will pass this around. So my name is Chris Lysy. I'm a I do stuff. I run an independent business. I'm a consultant. I do a mix of things. I used to be a researcher. So I have a master's in sociology. I spent years as a researcher and evaluator of federal contract research and evaluation for Department of Education, Department of Health, Department of Criminal Justice, like all sorts of random federal projects. I bounce back and forth between IT, systems analyst, design, project stuff, research, data collection, all sorts of random things, because like a lot of people who end up in this line of work, I was not quite a developer or an IT person. I wasn't quite a designer, and I wasn't quite a project person. So what I would do is I'd go into a place and I'd get really confused, and I'd bounce back and forth from the different departments, wondering exactly where I fit, and then I'd leave and go on my own 2 years ago, doing my own projects, kind of following where user needs are and different challenges are. And I don't know, I think it might be better if everybody introduces themselves. So let's do that. Lexi.
I'll stand. Hi, I'm Lexi Namer. I'm right here. I am currently a designer and developer at a small agency, a digital agency out of the frontier called Unity Digital. And we do kind of digital web-based work for nonprofits and local community-focused organizations. So that's really neat. My background is a little bit varied as well. I don't have a computer science background. I don't really have a design, like traditional design education. I actually started out as a freelance photographer. So I've touched many aspects of visual communication, and my driving force is storytelling and figuring out how to best convey the message to users and to the audience, and helping ensure that the users get the information that they need as well as the clients get the results that they need. So I started out as a photographer, and my freelance clients actually asked me to redesign their websites, and so I'm very self-taught in that way. And then I have a master's degree in interactive media, in journalism, actually. So I've touched many different ends of the spectrum. These days I spend a lot of time developing, but prior to this I was actually at Duke, where I was working as a designer and developer, but I was working alongside a lot of the IT department. So I hope I'm speaking to a good crowd tonight. So, thank you.
Good evening, I'm Dr. Kenya Oduor, and I am managing partner of Geeks, and we partner with large organizations to help with basically making sure that you define the right solution and design it most effectively for your users. So really uncovering who your users are, how they think, how they work, what they do, that sort of thing, and then turning that into the experiential aspects of the solution. My background is human factors psychology. How many of you know what human factors is? Okay. Okay, good. So a few of you know. So human factors is a blend of psychology, so cognitive psychology, biomechanics, physical and cognitive, and industrial engineering. So understanding how people work, how they think, how they move, and designing systems that complement rather than disrupt the way that they work. My experiences have been in companies like IBM, LexisNexis, that sort of thing. So I've been doing this for 18 years, and so I felt like it was time a couple of years ago to venture off and take those experiences of being a practitioner, being a leader within corporate organizations to help other corporate entities get better at building the right solutions. And I'm looking forward to you guys providing as many questions. There's no silly questions, so we're here to give you guys tools that you need to go back and figure out how to do things more effectively for your users, so thank you.
Hi there. Hi there. I'm Nathan Steele. I'm co-founder of Logo, which is a digital product design and development agency. We make everything from mobile apps to web apps. Something for us is understanding business strategy, who the end user is, and then from there create a medium with which to deliver that. So our cornerstone of that process is user experience, essentially. So my background, I've got a BFA, which is in design, and then also I've had almost half a decade of deep interest in psychology, and then I go to basically every entrepreneur meetup I can find myself in, so that covers the gamut of business strategy. And so prior to starting my own business, I was working in a Fortune 500 company, and I was like, I need to go do something else with myself. And so I launched myself out. I came across the meetup, and I realized, wow, this is where all my strengths are at. So this is how I found myself here. So thank you so much, and I look forward to answering you guys' questions.
So as you can see, people find their way into UX. It's more like a spiritual awakening of sorts. And they're like, I found my people. But I'd like to know a little bit more about you guys. I've been trying to circulate. I've asked everybody here to circulate a little bit and try to get a sense of who's out here, because the UX presentation is more like, well, what do you want to talk about? But I just kind of want to get a lay of the land right now. How many people in here are regular AIT members, and they might be interested in the topic, but they would have been here regardless of the topic? Okay. How many people came here because they saw one of my cartoons?
I did.
All right. How many people here are in what Nathan just described, kind of trying to figure out what this is because you think you might want to do it? Like, this could be a potential career path. You're a creative person who also has an IT background. Yeah, I heard some of you in the back while I was walking around. I can tell that. How many people here are college students who are like, wow, this sounds like an interesting topic. I need to jump into the IT world and find out what people are talking about. Okay. Okay. And any UX skeptics? Okay. Any UX professionals right now doing the role of UX? And if you have a mustache like that, of course. Okay. And there were some more. I saw some more. There's low hands, apparently. So if you're a UX professional, you're like this. Let's see.
I would also say people who are performing UX roles or responsibilities, but that's not their primary function.
Yes. So you're not calling yourself a UX person, but that's essentially what you're doing. Anybody? Any human-centered designers out there? Any, okay.
How many of you have to interact with any kind of designer or less technical?
Every day.
So I'm gonna just start by, start with the elephant, which is IT people have a really bad reputation of creating ugly products. And project people have a really bad reputation of blaming IT people for creating ugly products that are probably more the project people's fault because they make assumptions based on what they think the IT people can do, not really understanding what the IT people can do, and then trying to create something that is really hard to create. Like, let's take something that somebody put $1 million into, and we want to recreate it better for $5,000. So that's what UX designers do. Right? If you spend way more money, it's a better product, right?
We were having this friendly debate earlier. He was saying that, and I was pushing back a little bit because he was saying, oh, you know, you just try and get all the things done quickly and hurriedly in budget. And I was saying, maybe not necessarily. Maybe instead of trying to get things done quickly and they might end up a little more sloppily, we can like pare it back and see what we can, you know, succeed and what we can nail down very, very well that's going to be the core of the product or of the app or the website or whatever you're creating. How can we figure out what that kind of parameter is, what that baseline is, and work within that guideline as opposed to just kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall and trying to hit every single point on this checklist just to hit.
And I think you guys get asked to throw spaghetti at the wall a lot. At least my working with IT, that tended to be the big thing. Here we want you to do this, and this, and it's going to be great. I find that, okay, how many people know what UX is versus UI? How many people have no idea what the two mean and how they're different? It's okay, anybody can. Okay, so there's a lot of fuzziness, that's what I'm getting.
So,
Kenya's a teacher.
so I also teach human-computer interaction over at State to computer science students, and I'm a psychologist, so it's a very interesting engagement because coming into things, students are typically like, what are people using our system for and why do I care? So they're more focused on, does it work? So when you talk about the UI, the user interface is the part in which, of a system, the part that the user actually interfaces with or interacts with. But the experience can be a number of things, so it's that journey. What are the aspects of the system that might not be tied to the interface or the different experiential aspects of how a user starts to use a product and how they get service around that product. All of that is the UX. And so a lot of organizations that are starting to see that it's important to be more progressive around not just focusing on the interface, and that they should focus on understanding that user journey and then building out solutions that align with the best experience from awareness to service and reuse and that sort of thing. So the differences are that UI work is a part of UX, but UX is the overall experience that a user has with your company, every touch point that they may have. Does that answer?
Yeah, but Nathan, I think, wants to add to something, and then Jerome had a question for this.
So the way I like to think about it relative to UX, it's the why I'm doing it and who am I doing it for. And then the UI is more about the frosting, how it looks. It's about, so if you've got the greatest UX, but it looks like it was built in the early 90s, who wants to use that? The good UI, it helps build trust. It makes somebody want to interact with it. And then once they start interacting with it, that's where UX comes in. So, anybody want to add anything to that?
I want to know what Jerome
So
had to say.
I just had a question. I work really good. I think I would work better with examples. So, like, I know a lot of people that get frustrated with every time you go to a new website, you go to some new place, you got to put in a new ID, a new password, and track all that stuff. When I started seeing applications saying, we're going to skip that whole process. That's not what we do. We don't want to have to maintain that stuff. you want to log into our website or our app through LinkedIn, Facebook, we're going to leverage all that stuff someone else has done and make it easy for you. In my head, that is user experience because you're making me have to type less stuff. Now, if it looks pretty and it's got a cool button and it looks like Facebook, that's the interface too because I'm used to it. So to me, that's kind of where they start to come together. But logging in to multiple tools is just frustrating. And that has nothing to do with the look of it. Is that like an example of what you're talking about?
I'd say too that somewhat, and I'll expand upon what both of them said, and then maybe go into different directions that people will disagree with. The way I tend to see, when I see UX and I see UI, and it tends to be UX UI, and then when people talk about it, they're talking about user interface. And they're like, oh, so you know JavaScript, of course. Because we're talking about the user interface, so you probably know JavaScript and front-end development. Okay, so I'm guessing that here, we tweak the CSS on my page, and then we'll be good, and you'll have a prettier experience for your user. So what I find is when people talk about UI, they tend to talk about front-end development, how a system works, what's on the front piece, and usually with the UX, it's a bit broader. UX, people who do UX like properly, from my perspective, tend to think about the user experience. And you can do UX and not have anything to do with any kind of tech. You can do user experience on walking into a room, and like what's going to be the person's experience when they walk into the room. What do they expect to do? And then you can do testing around that and figure out the best way that they like to walk into a room or pose for a picture, as we did earlier. And like all of these different interesting things, the things that we hope for. Like if you're trying to go home later and you want to catch an Uber, and that's something you say to yourself, which everybody around here probably drove and parked over there, except for John, who rode his bike somewhere. Yeah. Really, I just want to pick up my phone, hit a button, and walk outside to the cab. It has nothing really to do with tech. You just want to do something, and that's the experience. So a lot of times the bridge is, okay, there's an experience. A lot of the ways in which we interact with our businesses, with our applications, is through a phone or through a computer. That's the interface. So it's bridging from one to the other. It tends to be the thing, and when you pair it all together, everybody confuses the two. But they're two different things that often get lumped together.
So actually, I've done a workshop a couple of times, and it talks about kind of the different acronyms that are in the UX industry. UI, UXD, UX, HCD, human-centered design. There's tons of them. And I think that Chris was making a great point that they are separate, but they are merged. So yes, we want to think about the experience. We want to think about how a person's going to walk into the room. What do they expect? How do they expect to get the cab? But as you were saying, if this text is so small on the telephone that you can't hit the button, that's not helping your experience. That's technically, it's a design choice, it's a user interface choice, but it's impeding the experience of hitting that button and getting the cab. So they go really in tandem and they work against each other. And then I would say that works also in the broader field of tech and IT and development. Because if you have a designer come to you and say, oh, we want to make it easy to get the ride, but we want to do it with 55 sliding screens that happen over 5 seconds, you have to then implement that as the IT people, and it might not be the vision of what was happening in their head or what was happening in the research side versus what you actually do when you sit down on a computer and try and write those lines of code.
So when I pitched this session, I pitched it as UX to save money, not for a better user experience, not necessarily for a better experience, but really the role of a UX designer or a UX UI designer on a project. When they come in, if you're an IT person and you have a team why should you spend any bit of your budget on what is a designer, right? It's somebody who you're thinking, okay, that's our design team, they should fit the budget for this one, we shouldn't bother with it. Or you go back and forth on who kind of pays for the UX UI designer. And I've been on projects where it's come through the IT side, I've been on projects where it's come through the other project side. I've worked with design shops and graphic designers, and I've worked with IT shops and all parts in between. And I'm wondering, from the panel's expertise, from the panel's experiences, where do you find that you come into a project and who is hiring you? And I'm going to add another question, which is really bad for asking questions. You don't really want to ask 12. You want to ask more. But is it worth it bringing on a UX UI designer? Or is it not? Should you just hire another developer? Justify this. Why do we exist? I am looking at Kenya, because Kenya has the most experience justifying why we should exist out of this table. Now, Nathan and Lexi, they have some experience too, but Kenya has the most experience justifying our existence as a profession and why all of you should consider hiring somebody like one of us and not just think we're, okay, not so good of a designer or not so good of an IT person.
So I've had the experience of, like I mentioned, as a practitioner, but also as a leader in an organization where my manager was the general manager of the business, and so I had to constantly justify our existence, why you needed a UX researcher separate from a designer, and how the complement of the two can bring you a whole lot more value than one versus the other, and that sort of thing. So in looking at experiences like that, when you ask the question of, and you've asked me so many questions now, I forgot which one I should
Just
answer.
bad questions. Use your experience.
Why should you hire?
Why justify your existence?
Okay, so
why should you hire?
So when you look at why you should hire someone that does user experience or has that expertise, because there is a methodology or a framework around how you perform these activities. And yes, you can just jump on in and start designing a system, but there are ways in which you can do that. And someone that has that experience knows these are the things that are in our toolbox, and this is what you do with each of those tools. And they'll know, given a situation, what tool to pull out of that toolbox. And does the time permit, does the budget permit them to use those tools? So they'll be able to equip the team with more informed decisions around what to use when, how do you do certain activities, that sort of thing. So those are people that have the breadth of experience. And it sometimes is ideal that if you're going to hire someone in a UX role, you want someone that has breadth, but you want to make sure that they have depth. So if you look at those T-shaped skills, you want them to have depth in particular areas. So you might want someone that's heavier in research or someone that's heavier in understanding visual design. So you want to make sure that when you look at those individuals that you find someone, if you can only hire one, that can give you a lot of those different varied expertise and skills, but that they can go deep in that area where you may have a gap within your organization.
And Nathan, we talked about this before we even came here. What did you tell me?
You're building a product or optimizing it. You're ultimately, whether you're a designer, or UX designer, or interaction designer, any of those, you're ultimately making assumptions. And so you have to test those assumptions. We had a client recently, before they brought us on, they had a customer of theirs say, oh, we want this feature, yada, yada. So they spent 4 months, thousands and thousands of dollars building this thing just for him. Like, they didn't talk to anybody else, just for him. And then they built it, and he's like, oh, wait, that's actually, I wanted this other thing, so what I'm trying to say. So, you know, if he would have done like a quick prototype, potentially even, and tested it with other individuals, he would have found early on that he didn't have to spend those thousands and thousands of dollars and put more resources and time into something that would have been more fruitful, if that makes sense.
Can I add to that?
Sure.
So my experiences in the company is in partnering with organizations. Some of the biggest challenges are that teams don't define the right problem to solve. So in a lot of cases, they may think, to Nathan's point, that they're solving the right problem for a customer, but you want to do the due diligence to validate that you're solving the right thing before you even put pen to paper or write a line of code. And second to that, you then want to take to those same individuals that validated the problem, you want to take that prototype to them and say, hey, this is what you told me you needed or wanted. Does this actually align with your expectations? And that helps you to avoid building out things that you have to throw away, and it's a lot cheaper to throw out a prototype than it is working code. So if there's nothing else you can take away from this conversation, and you don't have UX resources, or those of you in the room are serving in that role, it's about validating, are we solving the right problem with real people that would use your product or use it today, and then prototyping something that you can put in front of them. Very scrappy, doesn't have to be anything formal, but get that validation, and when you come back into the organization, you can now have a conversation around what you learned and figure out, is this the right thing to build or not.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Can you help clarify how that's different than using agile principles to effectively build that same prototype? Because if that's what your team is doing, you're looking at your customer, you're looking at your requirements, you're looking at what it is you want to put out the door. And theoretically, your prototype would be that embodiment of agile, right?
Theoretically, if the team knows what the customer wants so deeply that they can understand it, if you're not actually out there doing usability testing, having people come in, asking them the kind of questions based on the real life situations that they're going through, you can have the most just agile, most perfectly set project management style where you have a team coming together, everybody's working on all cylinders and create a product nobody ever wants. It's like if you're not connecting with your customers, if you're not connecting with the problem out in the field, it makes it doesn't matter what kind of project management you have. It's if you're not listening to people. One of the things that I find is really useful about UX UI methodology and why I like it, why I like things like human-centered design, all these different things that we'll throw around and you'll find other things online, is that it separates the design process from a I know best, I know best, and a fight between who knows best on the project team. Because ultimately, the person who knows best is the person you're trying to serve, the problem you're trying to serve. And if you can show through evidence, systematic evidence, that month after month, your product's getting better, when you go talk to people and they're like, this is awesome, this does everything I want it to do, then you have shown that you're developing something useful. And you can show that before you even touch code. You can draw pictures, you can draw sketches, and you can put them together and make them interactive so that your app works before anybody touches code. Because you can draw the pictures, and as long as you know enough about code to know it's possible. So that's where the breadth goes.
Another thing to add to that is that Agile is traditionally a development methodology, so it's about being able to have operational effectiveness around building the solution. So different methodologies like pragmatic marketing, design thinking, those are frameworks that complement Agile and allow you to Chris's point, to validate that you're actually being operationally effective around the right solution. So that there's a complementary aspect of what we do with that development process.
I was going to just say another point is we've been talking about the why a lot, but just as important is understanding the who, and that's getting a deep understanding of actually who that user is. For example, if Chris was to make a company that was targeted towards moms, he might think that he knows best, but he is not actually the target user, so he might miss the mark a little bit. So that's another point of, yeah, you can work very efficiently in a team, but you're still kind of in that silo. And you're kind of deaf to all the noise of the people who would actually be using that product in real life.
I've known some teams relative to Agile to think you do the UX while doing the development. That's just trying to shove some nice, pretty things in between. And ultimately what you want to do is you want to have the UX process before the development, if that makes sense. So.
Go ahead.
It is, it's exactly.
And validation.
Yeah, requirement gathering, validation, definitely. It's better testing, better requirements, better spec. But Ryan, you had something.
I'm a visual designer, that's why I didn't quite know where to raise my hand.
He's like everybody else, he doesn't know where to fit, but we'll take you.
So actually, I'm working with some great, with a UX designer right here, doing a great job. But one of the challenges that we often have, and this is a little bit different, I guess, but we criticize organizations, we understand the value of UX. You do have to sell it. Right, so the client has to understand the value and it has to be willing to pay for it. There are times when they aren't. However, we also still know that we kind of need to go through all these things. And I guess how do you kind of manage that tension between doing what we know is best practice versus what
The client is ready to pay for. I'm sorry, I had the same question.
Okay.
I'm from the same company that he is, but I think we're an agency setting, so our clients are external, and we bid for projects. And what happens is we know the best practices, we understand the best practices and whatnot, but they might not have the budget for it, or maybe they want to spend most of the money in development, the code and actual solution rather than going through their iterations and with the research. They don't want to do the due diligence maybe because there's other political research where a 3-month deadline, even though it's supposed to take 6 months. So how do we educate what kind of advice you might have from your personal experiences?
Sure. I think it's like all business, which is hard, is proving why anybody should spend money on anything. It's like, do you provide value? And what kind of value? Not that just that you're following best practice or you want to follow best practice, but that by following best practice in user experience, user interface design, and you're going through this process and you're creating a better product that will either get more money, be completed in a shorter time frame, so that you're spending less money on the product, that you're smoothing out communication difficulties within departments, because it's really hard for project teams to understand IT teams when they don't really know code, and it's really hard for IT teams to know exactly what the customer wants when they're not talking necessarily to the customer, they're hearing it through their project team. And it's really hard for anybody to create something interesting for a real user if nobody's talking to the users. I left my research job because I kind of got tired of multi-million-dollar projects where you had a bunch of really smart PhD experts in education and special education doing really bad design because they're not spending enough time talking to the people that they're trying to serve and solving their problems. And over again, I see it. But I'd love to hear other.
So I'm at an agency right now, so I completely understand where you're coming from. I'm one of 4 people. We do a little bit of everything, and we have 20 plus clients at any given moment, so it's nuts. And one of the things that we try and kind of take that angle on and kind of sell the client, if you will, on, is that if you spend even just a week or so, you might not be able to go as deep of a dive as like bringing in a professional user experience, do a lot of testing, a lot of data research, as much as the product might need and we might want to do. But if you could say, like, if we could just spend a week or 2 weeks, like putting together these requirements, really taking a deep dive, the process is going to go so much faster because the developers are going to understand exactly what they're trying to build. Designers are going to understand exactly who they're trying to design for. And just saying to the client that they're going to understand the whole process and the purpose of why we're building something in a specific way and why we're designing something and who we're trying to target, as opposed to just jumping straight into the design or straight into the code without doing that due diligence and that research. And it's gonna just save a lot of time. One of my clients, several years ago, I was working on a project with a co-developer and designer of mine, and we failed to do that due diligence up front. And the client didn't kind of press on it. We failed to do our responsibility and press the client on it. And the project ended up taking 3 times as long. The requirements were all over the place. We ultimately had to sever ties because it got so messy and so elongated that nobody knew what was up and what was down. And so just trying to say, if we come at this at an organizational, methodological, research, data-driven approach, like the end result is going to be much faster, much more financially responsible, and be much more successful of a product.
So I think there's also an opportunity to, I think data-driven decision-making is one of the most effective ways to make things happen. It's also about making sure that there's traceability. So when you look at the Uber problem you're solving for your customer, with confidence, can your potential client articulate what that is and what data do they have to support that? Where they don't have that data, it's a conversation around the opportunities that might exist to spend a week or 2 going out and doing a scrappy job of getting some data in an informal way with clients, potential clients, but having the data to support that you're even solving the right problem and how you can help them do that. And then second to that, ensuring that from an operational standpoint, if you have Agile down pat, now you have the right tools to make sure that you have the problem, the requirements aligned with that problem, your epics and your user stories and everything align back to that problem. And it helps to ensure that your team is building the right things and scope creep doesn't happen, or they're not building stuff just for the fun of it. So it's about making sure that they have a good articulation or a solid articulation that's supported with data. And where they don't, how can you help them?
I have a question.
Yeah.
If you have a product or service that has no UI component, what value does a UX person bring to the table versus, say, a business analyst, business process person, or even like an account executive who interacts with the client and asks what they need?
So you can use user experience, basically anything. You have a medium, you have an end user, you have a business strategy, and so you're just testing all of those things. You're validating whatever it is you're building will work, and it will provide the necessary things that the end user is, while still allowing you to make money, hopefully, right? So that's what it provides. I think the best way to think of it is, are you going to build a house without a blueprint? How many of you would do that? I would guess not. Like, I've tried building, home craft projects with wood, some carpentry, and I've done it without a blueprint, and it didn't turn out very well, just to be honest. So I think that's a good metaphor there. Then, in addition to that, like, if you don't do UX, you're now potentially liable now, because accessibility is a big issue. You may find yourself on the wrong end right there. So.
And can I add to that?
Sure.
It's like a couple of functional, non-functional requirements like usability or responsiveness. Those are the things. Even if you don't have UI in the product, you still need those. How quickly this product will come up. Those kind of things UX engineers can help you.
So if I understand the question correctly, you asked about solutions that don't have an interface.
Correct.
So I sat on a panel a few months ago that was around zero UI and what skills are necessary when you talk about no user interface being present. So as long as there is a user and there's some way that they're interacting, so it might be through gestures, eye movements, their voice, that sort of thing. There's all that work that has to go into understanding how does the user learn those gestures, how do they understand what that will give them back from the system. So it's that give and take that has to be tested out and validated. But you look at the situation with Alexa recently where it picked up a conversation in someone's home and sent a message to their friend inadvertently. And so you look at things like that. Someone had to do the work to understand what is the what are the experiential aspects that might get us into a little bit of trouble if people do things inadvertently. So that's where you have to consider that interaction that might be physical or with voice or auditory.
Could you expand on the zero UI? I mean, I kind of get, based on what you said, that it's mostly the IoT devices and voice control, but just a little bit about zero UI and.
Sure, so zero UI is interacting with any system that's going to utilize, essentially won't have a display or a keyboard or a mouse in a lot of cases. So you're interacting with the system through your physical movements, your voice, different sounds or actions, that sort of thing.
It's like Microsoft Connect or using your Siri to look up something.
Exactly. So gaming environments, virtual reality, head-up displays where you might have some activity or action that you can perform by eye movement, that sort of thing.
I saw a question.
Really quick though, and I think you can also think of it, a lot of those things, a lot of this is like new media, but you can also think of it as even, I mean, we're in an IT focused group, even if it's something as simple as hardware like a hearing aid. That is a physical piece that doesn't have any kind of screen, any kind of interface, it's zero UI, but you have to have the experience in order for that product to be successful. You have to understand how that's going to function.
Back there.
Yeah, the question I had was sort of like a success story. You know, is there something that you can like describe that you've done and, you know, worked?
And what's really interesting to me is I've been reading a lot about rereading some of the older usability testing kind of books and Don Norman and looking at some of the Nielsen stuff. There are certain things out there that have been out there for a while, and then just kind of rereading certain things. And back in the day, the idea was, well, there's so few people actually going out and doing this that it's if you actually jump in and really dive into learning about the people you're trying to help and using that on an ongoing basis to perform tests and understanding how the things that you want your product to do, how it actually does in real life. So if you keep consistently doing that, you find a lot of success cases. So I've had a few. A lot of them tend to be like, I was doing a lot of reports and report writing, infographics, information design, data dashboards, those types of things. And there's a lot of tough and a lot of this data visualization back stuff about how you design interfaces, that kind of thing. But most of the time, people are not actually going out and really having serious conversations on an ongoing basis with the people they're trying to serve. So I was working with a group, the American Board of Pediatrics. They've been sharing data every single year with using a PDF report. And this happens all the time in research and evaluation, like PDF reports everywhere. But the problem with PDF reports is if you sit somebody down with a PDF report and you ask them to look at it and they're like, oh yeah, it's great, it shows data. But you ask them a real problem that they want to try to find an answer to. And they go in and they look at the report, well, I just want to know my state, or I just want to know my city, or my county, or I want to know this number versus this number. And it's those kind of things that I can mirror in something like Tableau or do some kind of data visualization that's interactive. Once I understand the kind of questions that they're going to have on an ongoing basis. So understanding those kind of questions, went back into the system, looked at their report, some of the data, started pulling it, trying to answer some of those questions. And there was this huge spike in the middle of the data, and they've been reporting every year forever, like 100 years of reporting every year. And they had this giant spike, and I said, what happened in 1982, or I forget the year, but, and they said, oh, well, we don't know. And I'm like, how could you not know? You're looking at this data, there's this huge spike. And they didn't know because they didn't look at it that way. And they didn't know because nobody really thought to try to go through and look at it that way. Like, it's just something you do over and over again. It's the reports that you're right now running every single year, every single month. Nobody's ever dived in and said, okay, what are we actually asking here? How else can we go in and do this? And how do we test and make it better each time? But anybody else, success stories, totally different than that.
So I have an example of working with a client on their customer service side, and so they had 20-plus tools that their customer service organization was responsible for working within those different systems while servicing a member. And so in the process of doing deep interviews with the people that use the system today and understanding the needs and the challenges and the motivations of helping their members as quickly as possible and giving them accurate answers and that sort of thing, we were able to come up with a system design that would eliminate 4 of those other existing systems. So this one system would incorporate the functionality of those 4 systems, and in that we were able to also see how tying together information more effectively allowed them to get their calls addressed and resolved more quickly. So examples, for me, it's more about how do you look at what exists today or what doesn't exist, and how do you validate that you're actually solving the right problem.
So I'll start with the one that the biggest one I think comes to mind for me is there's this B2B company out at Apex, and they came to us because they weren't making sales. And they assumed it was the software, and we were able to go in and validate it, in terms of a UX audit, figure it out. And since we've gone and done some work for them, they don't tell us what the numbers are, but they've doubled their staff, they're revamping the office. So I'm assuming it worked for them, I'm guessing. And then a recent one is last week, a friend of mine owns an ad agency, or not, I guess more of a marketing agency. And I just spent, an hour with him just kind of picking through his site, finding all where he could make improvements. And he made them over the next couple of days, and all of a sudden he already had people coming to his site, more easily able to talk to him. So he's been doing great with that too. So, yeah.
Something else that we look at success stories sometimes, or most of the time, from a customer's perspective, but there's also opportunities to look at how UX can help inform the internal dynamic. So helping the team to ensure that they're solving the right problems and in the right way. It makes, it provides clarity around the requirements. When you can articulate things in an interactive picture, it allows people to have something to use as a source of truth for dev and QA, and also the sales team and others can use that as something to support their activities as well. So sometimes looking at UX not only as a source of effectiveness for your customer, but they can also help your internal organization from an operational standpoint as well.
I think KPIs is the best way to sum that up. Key performance indicators, under asking yourself, what is success and how will you know you've succeeded before you go forward, essentially. And I guess normally we just, since we're so small, we kind of focus on the external, but I think just focus on the internal can be as much, if not more important, as can you say.
Yeah, I'll get you guys just 1 second, because I heard something else before we came up, so it was a pre-question, I'll say. And it was somebody was having trouble or just trying to figure out how UX could be used to go from where you have nothing into having something. Because it's usually there's like a blank canvas problem often, where essentially you start with the conversation and then you do all this research, and people are doing market research and focus groups, and you come together and you have all this information, and then you have to turn it into something. And that's really hard to do. Oftentimes, setting up very basic prototypes early on, even note cards and drawings and hand sketches, and using those very early in the process while you're collecting feedback, while you're going out and doing focus groups, to figure out what it is you should do. What are the kinds of things that other people like? And what are your competitors doing? Go ahead and do some usability testing on their stuff, because it's out there. You can go for it. And you'll figure out where people have problems with their software. And then maybe if you're trying to create something that's better than them, well, now you know what they do badly, because you've done your own stuff. You can use it in a number of different ways to really streamline the process make your stuff faster and relate to products before trying to figure out how many really expensive software engineers you're going to need to make a project happen. It's easier to hire somebody who can draw a good picture and make it a little interactive on the web and then go talk to some people.
And just to follow up on that as a resource, especially for those who might not have a budget for bringing in a UX professional, it's called the Sprint book. I believe it's by Jake Knopf, or Knapp. He was one of the founders of Google Ventures. But basically he talks about, it's kind of taking a little bit from design thinking, which is, you know, a buzzword these days. But it's talking about the different sprints of how you can go from that nothing idea to a tangible thing that you can test. He does it in 5-day sprints. So on day 1 you do this, on day 2 you do this, on day 5 you test it. But I think that you can take that concept and even break it down into a 3-hour sprint and say like, okay, for the first 30 minutes we're going to do this. For the second 30 minutes we're going to do this. And so making sure that you get those different tests, you get the validations, you get something to test, but it's coming from a space of understanding.
What a lot of organizations miss is someone to facilitate that exercise. Whether it's a UX person or someone else in your organization, you need someone that understands your user and their objective and able to hear the voice of the product team, the dev team, the creative team, but that can also help people to think outside of the box. And if you don't have that skill in your organization, it sometimes helps to bring someone in, but that can move the needle significantly if someone can help you to start to pull ideas out of people and then kind of converge around specific ideas.
And also to give permission to people to actually be able to talk. Right? I saw a couple of hands before. Who had their hands up before I just started going on and asking another one? So there was one there, there was one there, and there was one here. Let's start on the left and go to the right.
Okay, so
We're starting on the right and goes on the left. Sorry. That was my problem because I didn't see from your perspective.
That's a UX problem, right there.
Right? So go ahead. Your left.
Thank you. So earlier we talked about how UX can really help defining the problems that businesses have and get the right direction for solving those problems. How does UX tie in after that initial step has been defined and as the progress of the project goes along? How does it tie into that?
Well, luckily, as projects go on with anybody who's used IT, as they go further along, they get less complicated. There are less features. They're more directed. There's not a bunch of random tangents that people go. So luckily, everything gets simpler as the project goes on, not more complicated. There's no such thing as tech debt. That's all just a myth. Scope creep myth too. But tongue in cheek. But it's really like, it depends if you want to commit to it. Okay, if you believe, like we're all believers. You might not be a believer. But if your organization embraces the idea that we want to engage our users, our people, the people that are having the experience, whatever it is we're offering, that we want to do this on an ongoing basis. There are people who will say, don't put a big budget in advance and just do some UX right in the front and then stop. I'd rather you just take a little bit of money and have ongoing user testing with 3 people a month, every month, and then everybody will get together and you'll listen into those conversations. And then you'll have the project team there, and then you can add feedback, and then you go in the next month and do it again. Maybe you just set up a one room and you bring in like 3 people that you give them free lunch or a dinner, and then you have them stand for. But there are ways to get people to come into wherever you are and talk about what it is that you do and try to help you through it. If you pay them money, usually they like that. And then if you sit in the other room and you turn on some kind of screencasting tool so that you can watch them run through the product and talk very openly and honestly, like, man, this is ugly. Oh, God, why did somebody design this? And then you're in the other room, probably on another floor because you don't want to go, what? And have that guy yelling. But really, the idea behind that, the ongoing process is that over time it's going to become somebody's baby and they're not going to want to change anything, so you have to externalize the feedback and keep it coming. And if you externalize the feedback and keep it coming, people will adapt, and if they can hear it firsthand and they're like, everybody hates this thing that I thought they loved, okay, now they're willing to give it up and go, okay, maybe we should focus on that. So it's kind of about externalizing things.
If there's nothing else, if you guys don't have the time, the budget, et cetera, to set up any sort of iterative usability testing, there's nothing else you can take away from here today. I'd suggest that if you don't already have your UX people engaged with development so that before they check in code for QA, that they go and sit down with the UX person and have them walk through what they've just done in a sprint so that they can clean up their code before it goes into QA, and now you save time and money on QA finding bugs or missing bugs around the experience, because those are bugs as well. And that can then be fixed ahead of it being checked in for QA. So that's a really quick win, if nothing else.
Next question.
UX is great. I totally support and appreciate, but couple of things. UX and UI are great when you have no idea about the requirements, customer, what they need, and all other stuff. But if you have great business analysts who can do elicit customer needs, do prototype upfront, communicate with customer, bring those feedback, then I feel like UX may not be very much needed from the justifying point of view of cost. That's
So-
my view. And from my
So if you-
experience, being a small business owner, I try to cut costs, and I feel like that might be my solution, because most of our business analysts nowadays are very smart. In agile development, they do lots of good eliciting customer requirements. They go feedback, we do prototype upfront. In the agile development, everything is fast. We get the feedback quickly from the customer. So in that case, I feel like I might not need it.
It
Tell me
sounds
I'm wrong.
like to me that you're already doing it. I mean, UX is more a methodology
That's
than it
right.
is a person.
Right.
So I think it's a very valid point, and I've seen it with experience that you have people in a business analyst role who can pick up some of those skills and add it to their toolkit as well. I will say that as a hiring manager, I can say that when I look at the different, I've owned business analysis, UX, technical writing, under my umbrella at some point. And you can see a significant or marked difference between different UX skills. So someone with a fine arts background versus someone with a psychology background versus someone with an industrial design or computer science background, you get different things or different outcomes from those individuals, and they're capable of doing different things better than one of the other people. I am not a designer. I can design, but if you put it in front of someone who has a design background, they will run circles around what I've designed. I understand mental models and developing the ways in which a person works through a solution and that sort of thing. You might have business analysts that can do that as well, but what you're getting might not, if you haven't seen what a UX person with that skill set where you might have a gap, if you have not seen what they're capable of, you might not know what they're capable of to bring even more to the solution.
That's what I did. I know,
Okay.
they are great, they are good. But the point is, have you done any cost analysis? The cost versus
Yeah.
how you, I need to hear more cost analysis.
So I've had to deliver ROI of UX types
Exactly,
of decks to my leadership to get justification for why you should increase the number of people on the team over a 5-year period and what that investment looks like and what you get from it and that sort of thing.
Right.
I totally get your point about the business analyst, but the way they look at things is typically they have a skill set or an expertise that they bring that might be different. You may be able to get all of those things, but like I mentioned before, that T-shaped skill or that deeper skill, they may not go very deep in some of those
Some
other
of the
areas.
business analysts are very smart,
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Absolutely.
Work.
As a smart business analyst, I want to say, not agree, LinkedIn agrees, I know I'm young compared to a lot of people here, but I've been lucky enough to have worked with UX, visual designers, and everybody under the sun. I am good at what I do, but I will tell you this, it's going to take me 4 hours writing and documenting what a search bar icon and search is going to do before even knowing whether the client likes it or not. Like, it would take me 4 to 8 hours. If you give me time, I'll write more. I can write a thesis paper on. But having that UX person there to prototype it, I don't want to, she's my UX person at my visual designer, but I don't want to, but I bet it's not going to take her 8 hours to come up with a prototype.
And also,
And I know this
if you're using someone that's a designer that's using out of the box,
Yeah.
if they're using out of the box components and patterns, they can get it done even quicker, where you don't need to create a spec for your development team. They can get all that detail
Exactly.
from
And
someone else.
other thing is the way a lot of clients work in nowadays is they don't want to be reading 60-100-page business requirement documents. They want to look at something that's tangible, make a decision, and then maybe read like high-level user story on what that is. So I kind of don't agree with you about the need. Doesn't matter what kind of business analyst and what they can do. Maybe they're performing UX work without even having that title, but having that UX person with that knowledge to help you prototype very fast is critical for any success. I've done both waterfall and agile Scrum, but I've had UX visual designers with me all along.
Right. There are nowadays lots of tools available. You can do wireframe. Quickly, your developer can come up with the prototype in instant.
I think what's happening there is you're removing your business analyst role and putting on a UX
No.
role. No.
Yeah.
Not as your job title and salary is not changing. What I'm trying to say is you are performing that role. I understand as a business analyst you're supposed to do prototyping, but I'll tell you that you doing prototyping versus a user experience who understands focus groups, who understands psychology, who understands what the best practices are in the industry is going to be different. So I don't want to put us to a test here, but I do think that there are some business analysts who can do UX work, but UX people know what they're doing. So I'm not.
The ones up here,
I think
we all know what they're
it's a valid point that I've heard before, and it's a conversation to have offline after this.
And we'd have to do it for you too. We'd have to do your user experience with UX people versus business analysts.
Yeah, and ultimately it's
We'll
an
run a test
evaluation
and-
of
On
the
cost analysis, those are the things should be very effective to understand.
It's also an evaluation of your existing system by someone other than the people in your team
Yeah.
to see if there are
Sometimes
opportunities
it's-
to improve the experience.
Over here.
Hi, my name is Jesse Alexander. I'm with White Hat AI.
Okay.
And we've all been given projects where we think that the people who've given us the projects think they know what the customer needs, have spec'd out what's required, and said, just go do it. And those projects, I think 99.9% of the time, don't meet the client requirements. So we all came here today to walk away with tangible lessons that will make us do better when we're either in this role or trying to help this development. Would each of you give a tactic or a strategy for addressing that in the best and most creative way possible so we can be successful?
And I'll also add Don't Make Me Think, I've always found is a good book if you've never read it.
Okay.
On, and actually he has a follow-up that's even, that I think is better for more tactical, practical, kind of you want to go in and do it. It's like something about a rocket engine, like, or not a rocket engine, I forget what it's called.
Surgery.
Rocket surgery, yeah. That book, he just goes through like a very basic kind of usability testing kind of framework and just here's something you can do. I don't know. But really just thinking, okay, let's bring some other people onto this. Let's see what other people on a regular basis as we're going through the development process. Let's test this with some actual people out there in the world who are not so involved in the project team, they're afraid to hurt Bob's feelings because Bob's design is, you know, that's his thing. We don't want to hurt his feelings. Get people who can hurt Bob's feelings. So,
Sure, well, I mean, ultimately, if we don't go through, we call it a discovery process, but ultimately, if we don't go through it, we're just setting ourselves up for failure, so we just don't do it. So if they're gonna nickel and dime us on the discovery process, then that usually means they're gonna nickel and dime us on other aspects of the project. So we just don't work with them. I mean, when it comes down to it.
I currently mentor at NC State. There's a program called the I-Corps program, and so it's an NSF-based or backed program where I'm working with two very smart electrical engineers, both PhDs, who have a technology that they've patented. And so part of the program requirement is that you have to go and interview 30 people over a 6-week period and interview them about how useful your technology, or you're validating if your technology is useful to them. So in my first conversation with them, they told me all about the technology, what it does, how it works, and that sort of thing, but I said, well, what do I do with this? And I had a really hard time articulating that, but they ultimately were able to reframe it around the value to the user, and being able to reframe things in that way, and it can sometimes be difficult to articulate that if you haven't done the work to validate. So first, reframing from the user's perspective, and then going out, and I'm not endorsing 30 interviews because that is a lot, but going out and interviewing at least 10 people, 8 to 10 people, and in those questions, you want to provide them with objective, open-ended questions. What would this do for you? What challenges do you have today? So stepping away from your solution, what challenges do you have today in this space? How do you feel in that situation or in that space? So you want to get at not only the validation of your solution, but how people feel. So what are their frustrations? And more importantly, what are their motivations? Is it time? Is it money? People always have a motivation to use your solution. You want to figure out, is it about its accuracy? Is it about its speed, price, that sort of thing?
I'm going to take a little bit different approach and talk about the client directly. Because sometimes, more often than not, they're kind of their own worst enemy. They might hand you a one-sheet paper that has all these requirements that they didn't even write, their assistant wrote or their intern wrote. And I think that before you get into any kind of design, development, before you even think about what tools you're going to be building with, you're going to be designing against, the users you're going to be testing, you need to double and triple and quadruple check what it is that that client is trying to get. What is their goal? What is their financial goal? What is their business goal? What is just their vision for their company and the ones who are going to be writing the check? Because as you were saying, that if they just hand you a requirement and you go and do it, it's probably not going to align. So before you go out and test with those users, you need to make sure that the client understands what you're testing and that everyone is on the same page. And then don't just like leave them out in the cold for the rest of the project and then 4 months later come back and say, this is what we built now. Don't you think it's great? Check in with them often. Check in with them frequently. I don't think that you can over communicate with the client and just be like, here's what we've got today. What do you think? And if nothing else, it just makes them feel valued and like they're getting their money's worth. And at the end of the day, it's a transactional relationship.
To add to that, there's a book out there. There's a value prop kind of roadmap, and there's a book out there by a company called Strategizer, and they'll give you not only that framework which you can get online, but they give you a guidance around how to complete the framework, which has who are your key partners, who are your customers, what is your value proposition, those sorts of things, and having them provide you with that information or helping them to complete that will get to, do you really understand what you're trying to sell and to whom?
And I'll also say from my standpoint, the kind of services I provide, I know the kind of services like Nathan and you know, Kenya and Lexi, a lot of us tend to do this thing where we'll come onto a project and I'm almost better at like, I'd like to train you, I'd like to train your staff, And if you guys can do it without me, and you want to do it without me, let me just train you guys, and I'll back away. And if I'm providing value, keep paying me. If I'm not providing value, don't pay me anymore. But it's weird, but a lot of us will probably tell you similar things, because we don't want to be somewhere where we're not useful, because we're really focused on creating useful things. That includes our own services. So you'll find a lot of user experience people who will back away when they find that somebody doesn't actually listen to what the customer is thinking, somebody doesn't really want to follow any of these things, they really just want to do their thing and have it be prettier. We tend to back away and say, it's not for us. Or it gets really expensive.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
We've got about 5 more minutes. There's a gentleman in the back where he's had his hand up for quite some time. I want to make sure that he gets an opportunity, please.
I'm too short.
It's all good, but I actually just wanted to add some numbers to validate the UX. I actually have some statistics and or from a case study that a company of ours worked with, but I would say I would consider myself a salesperson, and I think that when you talk about UX, after hearing all of this, we were just joking about it. I think you're like digital salespeople. I mean, as a UX designer, you can't really define when you see a salesperson why they're closing 80% of their sales or appointments, and someone that's not good at sales is only closing 20%. You can't really say why, but it's just like an art. It's like something that they have. But we had a client that, my company does some venture capital, so we have a portfolio company that was running Facebook ads, and we had beautiful UI. I mean, we had these awesome Facebook ads, awesome marketing funnels that looked, well, we thought they were awesome. They looked really nice, and we were spending $310 per client that we were getting, and the lifetime value was $132. So we were losing 50%, 57% profit. We brought in a UX specialist to help us with our marketing funnels, and from the UX experience, we were able to cut from $310 per customer to $78 per customer. And now we had a 70% profit margin on our ads that we were running. And to me, that's like the business of UX. I mean, I think that really puts some numbers into it.
Actually, did you have something to say, Nathan?
For a previous question.
Okay, so we're good. No, there was one more question.
One more.
Okay, last question.
Thank you. This might be a little bit more of a challenging question for you.
Sweet.
Well, I know that the products like the iPhone and services like Google are held out as being a great triumph of simplification and user experience. But I think for doing a lot of mundane things, if you think about what you can accomplish with a Stradivarius violin or with an airplane cockpit, those are not one-button things. They require discipline and habits. And to be honest, as a pilot, you don't think you're in a pattern and you've practiced and all of those things are considered. But I ask this because I'm a software developer. I work on an analytics application. But we want the user to provide their intelligence, not just, we can run the math and we can tell them this is probably I mean, mathematically this is what we have. But they're gonna have other insights and other sources of information. So here my question is what are your design priorities? I understand sometimes, like for Netflix or something like that, it's probably simplification. Let's move them on so we can get a purchase. But for something that you're going to do that's creative, like I want to fly the airplane, or I want to play the song. Like I don't want to push a button and say play pretty song on violin. I want to experience
and that goes back to the UX versus UI and all those kind of pieces. And even with UI, it's more like if the role is to fly a plane and it needs all those buttons and needs all those buttons in that order, and you go and you talk to pilots and you find out as you're sitting there with the pilot and they're showing you how they fly the plane that they need all those buttons in that order, and if you take a button out of that order, they're going to mess something up. That is not going to be good UX to make it simpler. And if the violinist needs the violin to be a certain way, and you can be like, we can make this cheaper and simpler, and the violinist says, I would never play that, that is not a good violin.
So I'm not sure if you were one of the people that raised your hand when I mentioned that my background's in human factors psychology, but it started in aviation in the military after World War II when pilots were crashing inadvertently when they changed the design of the plane. So when we talk about the varied skills that UX people have, there's also the understanding that some people, like myself, are more versed in understanding complex systems and the cognitive aspects of how you design something and how someone uses it. And that's where you have to look at what are the needs of your tools and your users, and where you need someone that's more capable from a visual or aesthetic standpoint versus someone who's more versed in some of those scientific principles.
So I think it goes back to the who and the why. If there's no overlap to those, then don't move forward with it. Like, and relative to analytics, it tells you what's wrong, but it doesn't necessarily tell you why it's wrong, if that makes sense. So.
And I think especially today, on the web in particular, it's often easy to confuse good design with simple design, and that's not necessarily accurate. Good design can be very complex. If you look at an airplane, I don't understand how that works, but it works, and every time I fly, it keeps me in the air, and I trust that design to do that. So I think it's just, you know, in the days where we're on the Netflix with the one-click touch, that was intentional for a reason, and just because that product is simple does not mean that every other product has to be simple.
It's also no excuse for making really complicated things that should be simple.
And with that, I'm sorry, I really I want to be aware of everybody's time. Thank you very much for coming, and please give them a hand.